Hey, I'm glad you're here. When you think about the fact that there's 50 billion videos being put on the internet every day, isn't it crazy that you're here? So, hey, thanks for joining me. Today, we're going to do a summary of Acts chapter 14, where Paul gets stoned. And no, I don't mean that kind of thing. He gets rocks thrown at him to the point where his disciples, or not his disciples, but the disciples, think that he's dead. Okay, so let's jump right into it. I got 5 points I want to cover in Acts chapter 14. It's not a super long chapter, but let's get right into it. So in Acts chapter 13, it left off with Paul and Barnabas going to Iconium, and once there, they stirred the pot. I mean, literally stirred the pot to the point that unbelieving Jews stirred up strife among the Gentiles. So now, not only did Paul and Barnabas stir up strife, but they had two significant people groups, the Jews and the Gentiles, fighting amongst each other. Okay. So in Acts 14, 1 and 2, Paul and Barnabas had a way of getting people to fight amongst themselves. That's the bottom line. When you read it, you'll see it. So in today's, stick with me for a second. In today's politically correct, oversensitive, super spiritual, and touchy-feely culture, Paul and Barnabas would be spiritually stoned to death by the majority of religious church-going folks. That's just a reality. Point number 2. In Acts 14, 4 through 7, Paul and Barnabas continue in their most insensitive ways and ultimately divide the city of Iconium to the point that Gentiles and Jews wanted to kill them. Okay. So now I want to give a little warning. There's going to be some sarcasm. If that offends you, I'm sorry, but so I'm going to say some things about Paul and Barnabas. They were so divisive. Why did they have to be that way? Couldn't they have just talked about things that everyone could agree on? Why couldn't they focus on unity and just talk about, how good of a guy Jesus was? I don't know why they had to hurt people's feelings. Can't we all just get along? All right, that's my sarcasm for the morning. But I'm going to tell you from personal experience, just between you and I get this a lot. When you talk about the truth, people think that you are being unnecessarily divisive. The conclusion that I've come to in my many years of reading and studying the Bible and dealing with people one-to-one is people only want like milk toast kind of truth. We can talk about Jesus and the cross. We can talk about, resurrection. We can talk about certain things, like these certain kinds of truths that sort of like everybody kind of acknowledges within the Christian world or the Christian, community of local churches or whatever, however you want to express that. But as soon as you get into other things, then people think you're being divisive. And of course, like I already referenced, we live in this very politically correct, oversensitive, touchy-feely world where if you hurt anybody's feelings, you're a bad guy. But here was Paul and Barnabas tearing it up, and literally causing the entire city to fight amongst itself. It's almost like they just poured gas on the city and shook the dust off their feet and dropped a match on their way out. Okay, but they paid a price for this. So my question to you is, do you think this was God's will? Or do you think Paul and Barnabas were just these nasty, overbearing, only standing on their biblical knowledge kind of guys? Is that who they were? They were all about knowledge and they were just pissing people off because of their knowledge. Do you think that's who Paul and Barnabas were? I think a lot of people do. I think that's why Paul gets so often ignored in churches today. All right, point number 3, Acts 14, 8 through 18. I'm just going to summarize it. Again, my assumption is you're actually reading these chapters. I have a whole Bible group and we're doing a Bible reading challenge right now to read from Acts to Philemon, 1 chapter a day, 5 days a week. weekends off to get caught up or take a break. And then all my content is designed to support that. So if you haven't checked that out, feel free to. You can get caught up. Okay, so Acts 14, 8-8 basically involves Paul and Barnabas healing a man who had been lame since birth. And because of this, the people thought they were gods and attempted to do animal sacrifices to them until Paul and Barnabas basically stopped them and said, hey, we're men just like you are, you know, and they had a lot of discussion around that. Point number 4, Acts 4, 19 and 20, we see Paul get stoned. So I've referenced this a little bit, but we see Paul get stoned to the point that the disciples think he's dead. He suddenly rose up and walked right back into the city that had stoned him, and then left the next day and just carried on with his mission. Just like Paul is almost like a superhero. He just, I mean, can you imagine what the disciples must have thought? There they are, you know, they've probably seen or experienced stonings with some regularity, because that was just a Jewish thing. And so here they are looking at Paul. They think he's dead, and then he just rises up. Now, whether he was, and that was some kind of miracle that God did, we don't know. The Bible doesn't say. But these very experienced men thought he was dead. So go figure. But at any rate, he rises up, and without fear, without any apparent fear, he walks right back into the city that he'd previously lit on fire, and continues to preach the truth. There's something to be learned there. I think Christians are far too fearful today. They don't want to offend anybody, and so they pussyfoot around in the truth and don't really say much truth at all. And Satan's pretty happy about that. So the bottom line here is Paul was not an insecure Christian. And from my perspective, there are a lot of insecure Christians today, people that aren't even sure they're saved. How are you going to tell somebody about Jesus Christ and the saving that he is able to do because of his death, burial, and resurrection, if you're not sure that you actually got that? Okay, so you got to be sure. You got to be sure. Otherwise, you're going to be fearful. All right, point number 5. Paul and Barnabas returned to Antioch and tell the church how God had opened the door of faith unto the Gentiles. Okay, so I'm going to spend just a little bit of time here. This is Acts 14:27. I want to read the verse. And when they were come and had gathered the church together, they rehearsed all that God had done with them and how he had opened the door of faith unto the Gentiles. And so Acts, the book of great transition, as I like to call it, continues toward the Apostle Paul becoming more prominent in the development of the church. And so from this point forward, we're going to see Paul become kind of preeminent more and more and more in the development of the church, all the way towards the end of the book of Acts. And then, of course, we have the 13 books of the Apostle Paul coming next. So stand by for that. So that's what I got for you. I'm glad you're here. I hope you stayed and listened. Again, if you want to join my Bible reading challenge, it's not too late. We're at Acts chapter 14. So literally in a few days, you could probably read those chapters and get caught up, and then come along with this ride, this 23-week journey between Acts to Philemon. And 2 things: you'll start to develop a Bible reading habit, and you'll gain some deeper understanding of these most important books that we have in the Bible for us today in the dispensation of the grace of God. Hey, I talk a lot about dispensations. If you've never heard that word, or if you don't really have a good working knowledge of what that word means, hit me up. I've got a really pretty thorough study on that topic, and it will clear up your thinking in a lot of ways. So I'll be happy to send that to you. All right. Thanks so much for being here. I look forward to seeing you soon. Bye-bye.